On a bitterly cold morning, as the world rushed past without a second thought, something fragile and forgotten lay trembling inside a battered cardboard box, left to perish, abandoned by those who should have cared. But God was not done writing his story. A man, simply going about his work, heard a faint cry, a sound that would change both of their lives forever. And years later, when he needed it most, that small act of kindness returned in the most unbelievable way. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from today. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder of God's love. The sky was a dull shade of grey, heavy with thick clouds that threatened snowfall. The frigid morning air bit at exposed skin, turning breath into visible mist. It was just another winter morning in the city, a morning where life hurried on, indifferent to those left behind. David Reynolds, a sanitation truck driver in his late 50s, sighed as he pulled his thick gloves tighter over his calloused hands. It had been years since he stopped expecting surprises on the job. Collecting trash day after day, in neighborhoods both wealthy and forgotten, he had seen it all. Broken furniture, discarded dreams, things once cherished and now abandoned. But today, something would be different. As his truck rumbled into the vast landfill on the outskirts of town, the familiar scent of rotting waste and damp cardboard filled the air. The ground beneath his boots was slick with melting snow, mingled with filth and remnants of things no one wanted anymore. He maneuvered his truck into position, preparing to unload another heap of discarded remains from the city's endless cycle of consumption. Then he heard it, a sound so soft, so fragile, that at first he thought he had imagined it, a faint whimper, barely audible above the groan of machinery and the distant cawing of scavenger birds circling overhead. He froze, his heart giving an uneasy lurch. Years on this job had made him numb to the things people threw away, but there was something about that sound, a plea, a desperation, that cut through the cold morning air. David turned off the engine, the sudden silence making the whimper even clearer. His boots crunched against the frozen ground as he followed the sound, weaving through mounds of discarded furniture, broken electronics, and torn bags of household waste. Then he saw it, a battered, damp cardboard box, half collapsed under the weight of surrounding trash. It looked no different from the countless others that littered the dump, yet from within its fragile walls came the unmistakable sound of something still clinging to life. Cautiously, David crouched down and peeled back the torn flap of the box. What he saw inside made his chest tighten. A tiny golden retriever puppy, barely more than a few weeks old, lay curled in the corner. Its golden fur was matted with grime, its frail body trembling uncontrollably from the bitter cold. Wide, terrified brown eyes met his, pleading without words. David exhaled sharply. He had seen a lot in his lifetime, but this was different. Someone had left this puppy here to die. His gloved hand hovered for a moment before he reached inside. The puppy flinched, but it was too weak to resist. When his fingers brushed against its fur, he felt the sharp ridges of ribs beneath, a clear sign of hunger, of neglect. "Easy there, buddy," David murmured, his voice rough yet strangely gentle. "I gotcha." Carefully, he lifted the puppy out of the box, cradling it against his chest. The poor thing shivered violently, its tiny body barely generating enough warmth to keep it alive. A wave of anger and sadness churned inside him. He had seen broken things before, but this wasn't just another discarded object. This was a living, breathing soul. Someone had made the cruel decision to toss this puppy aside, leaving it to freeze or be crushed beneath the weight of the next garbage load. David glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching from the distance, some heartless figure who had abandoned the little creature. But there was no one. Just the vast expanse of the landfill, an endless graveyard of things that had outlived their usefulness. The puppy let out a weak whimper, pressing its tiny nose against his coat as if searching for warmth. David sighed. He knew he had no business taking in a dog. His life was simple: wake up before dawn, work until his back ached, return to an empty house, and do it all again the next day. He wasn't a young man anymore, and taking care of a pet was a commitment he wasn't sure he could handle. But he also knew one thing for certain: he couldn't leave this little one here. With a decisive nod to himself, David adjusted his grip on the shivering pup and made his way back to the truck. He pulled open the passenger side door and carefully placed the puppy on the seat, wrapping it in an old flannel jacket he kept for cold mornings. "Guess you're coming with me, kid," he muttered, shaking his head. The puppy blinked up at him, its tiny body still trembling, but its eyes filled with something new: hope. David climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and turned up the heat. As the warmth spread through the cabin, the little pup nestled deeper into the jacket, letting out a soft sigh of exhaustion. David stole another glance at the fragile creature beside him and felt something stir deep inside, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He had spent his whole life hauling away things people no longer wanted, but today, for the first time in a long while, he had found something worth keeping, and maybe, just maybe, that was no accident. David's small house sat on the edge of town, tucked between rows of aging buildings that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was home, quiet, predictable, and until recently, completely his own. That changed the moment he carried the trembling puppy through his front door. After the freezing ordeal at the landfill, David had immediately set about warming up the fragile creature. He filled a shallow bowl with warm milk, unsure if it was the right thing to give a pup so small, but to his relief, the little thing lapped it up eagerly, though its weak body trembled with each sip. Next came a gentle bath. David hesitated before turning on the sink faucet, wondering if the pup would be too weak to handle the water, but the grime caking its fur left him little choice. He worked quickly, keeping the water lukewarm and his touch careful. The filth melted away to reveal soft golden fur beneath. "That's better, huh?" he muttered as he wrapped the puppy in an old towel, rubbing him dry. The puppy, now visibly more comfortable, let out a small yawn, curling up into the warmth of the fabric. It was the first sign that he trusted David, and for some reason that stirred something deep inside the old man. He knew he couldn't just keep calling him kid. "Max," he said after a moment, trying the name out loud. It fit somehow, strong but simple. The puppy blinked up at him, tail giving a slight wag as if accepting the name as his own. For the first time in years, David felt a shift in his routine. His mornings weren't just about gulping down coffee and heading to work before the sun rose. Now he had a tiny shadow following his every step, padding after him on clumsy paws, whining for attention, or curling up at his feet when exhaustion took over. And David, despite himself, found he didn't mind. He told himself it was temporary, that he was just helping the pup get back on his feet. But when Max started wagging his tail every time David walked in the door, when the once frail pup started bounding around his tiny backyard with reckless joy, David felt something he hadn't in a long time. He wasn't alone anymore. Max had turned his small, quiet house into something more than just a place to sleep. But reality had a way of creeping back in. A decision that couldn't be avoided. One evening, after another long day at work, David sat at his kitchen table, staring at Max as the pup gnawed on an old slipper. The thought had been in the back of his mind since the day he brought him home, but now it loomed over him. Could he really keep Max forever? David was old. He worked long hours. He didn't have family around, and if something happened to him, what would become of Max? The pup deserved more than just a man who wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up. David sighed, running a tired hand down his face. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, after making a few calls, he found a reputable animal shelter in town. They assured him they had experience with abandoned puppies and would find Max a loving home. It should have been a relief. It was the logical thing to do. But as he looked at Max, who sat by his feet staring up with complete trust, David felt an ache in his chest that no logic could explain. Still, He made his choice. The following afternoon, with a heavy heart, David loaded Max into his truck. The pup, unaware of what was happening, wagged his tail, happy to be going for a ride. David didn't speak as they drove to the shelter. His hands tightened around the wheel. This was for the best. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. The drive to the shelter felt longer than it should have. David gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his knuckles white against the worn leather. The hum of the truck's engine filled the silence, but it did nothing to drown out the thoughts swirling in his mind. Beside him, Max sat on the passenger seat, his small body curled up on the same flannel jacket David had wrapped him in the day they met. The pup's golden fur gleamed in the weak winter sunlight, filtering through the windshield. David didn't glance over at him. He couldn't. If he did, he might not be able to go through with this. Memories that never faded. As he drove through the familiar streets, his mind drifted, not to the present, but to the past. Once, long ago, he had driven these same roads with someone beside him, someone who had filled the silence with laughter, who had reached across the seat to squeeze his hand when the world felt too heavy. Claire. Her name came unbidden, like a ghost whispering in the back of his mind. It had been years since she was taken from him, but grief had a way of lingering, settling into the bones like a cold that never quite left. Some days, he convinced himself he had learned to live with it. Other days, like today, he wasn't so sure. His life had become an endless routine. Wake up, work, come home, sleep, repeat. There was no laughter in his house anymore. No warmth waiting for him when he walked through the door. The bed on the other side of the room had been empty for years, the space beside him colder than any winter morning, and for the longest time he had told himself that this was just how it was now. But then Max had come along. A house no longer empty. The pup had been in his home for only a short time, but already things had changed. There was noise now, the sound of small paws skittering across the floor, the soft rustling of a wagging tail against furniture, the occasional excited bark when Max chased his own shadow. There was movement, the way Max followed him everywhere, padding after him when he made coffee, curling up by his feet whenever he sat in his old recliner. There was company, a presence in the house that made the silence a little less unbearable. But David had fought against it. He told himself not to get attached, not to let the dog become something more than a temporary guest. Because deep down, he knew how these things ended. He had lost before. He would lose again. Better to let go now before it became too hard. That was why he was doing this. That was why, despite the hollowness in his chest, he kept driving toward the shelter. A goodbye that didn't feel right. When they arrived, David parked the truck but didn't immediately step out. His fingers drummed against the wheel, his jaw clenched tight. Max, still curled up in the seat, lifted his head and gave a small, sleepy wag of his tail. He didn't know. He didn't understand. David swallowed hard and forced himself to move. He climbed out, walked around to the passenger side, and carefully lifted Max into his arms. The pup nuzzled against him, completely trusting, completely unaware that the man he trusted most was about to leave him behind. The shelter was a small building with a faded sign, the kind of place run by people who meant well but were always overworked. The woman at the front desk greeted him kindly, unaware of the war raging inside him. "You're bringing in a stray?" she asked, already pulling out a clipboard. David hesitated. The words stuck in his throat. He looked down at Max, who looked up at him with big, round eyes. He had meant to say yes, but all that came out was, "His name is Max." The woman smiled, writing the name down. "That's a good name. We'll make sure he finds a great home." A great home, a better home. That's what David wanted, wasn't it? He placed Max on the floor, and the pup immediately sat at his feet, tail wagging, completely content just to be near him. David took a step back. Max didn't follow. Instead, the pup just sat there, ears slightly drooping, watching him as if he already knew what was happening. David clenched his fists. "Sir?" the woman prompted. He cleared his throat, nodded stiffly, turned around, and walked out the door. A house empty again. The drive home was silent. The flannel jacket still lay on the passenger seat, but this time it was empty. When he stepped inside his house, the quiet hit him like a blow to the chest. No little paws clicking against the floor, no warm body curling up at his feet, no bright eyes watching his every move, just silence. David sat heavily in his chair, rubbing a hand over his tired face. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? But as he stared at the empty space beside him, the space where Max should have been, he wasn't so sure. The breaking point. That night, David barely slept. He tossed and turned, the house too still, too quiet. He kept expecting to hear the soft rustle of fur shifting in the corner, the faint jingle of a tiny collar, but there was nothing. At dawn, unable to ignore the gnawing ache in his chest, he made his decision. He grabbed his keys and jacket, barely stopping to lace his boots before heading back to his truck. The drive to the shelter felt even longer than before, his fingers tapping restlessly against the steering wheel. What if Max had already been taken? What if he was gone? The thought made something twist painfully inside him. When he pulled into the shelter's parking lot, his heart pounded. He pushed open the door, scanning the rows of cages, filled with hopeful eyes and wagging tails. And then he saw him. Max sat huddled in the farthest corner of his kennel, his small frame curled into itself. His tail no longer wagged. His bright eyes, so full of life just yesterday, were dull, staring blankly at the cold floor. Something inside David broke. He stepped forward, gripping the bars, his throat tight. "Max!" At the sound of his voice, the puppy slowly lifted his head. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't the joyful spark that had once greeted him. It was a look of resignation, a look that said he had already given up. David didn't hesitate. "I'm taking him home." The shelter worker blinked in surprise. "You just surrendered him yesterday." "I know," David said, voice firm. "I made a mistake." Minutes later, the paperwork was signed, the kennel door opened, and Max was in his arms once more. The moment David pulled him close, he felt the tiniest sigh of relief against his chest. When they stepped outside, Max lifted his head, licking David's chin once, his tail giving a hesitant wag. David let out a rough chuckle, rubbing behind the pup's ears. Yeah, he muttered. "I missed you too, kid." And as he carried Max back to the truck, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't making that mistake again. The years had passed quietly, each season settling into the next, weaving a routine that David and Max had come to know by heart. The old man had never imagined himself forming such an attachment, but Max had become more than just a dog. He was family. They had their rituals. Every morning, David would pour himself a cup of coffee while Max waited patiently at his feet, ears perked, tail thumping against the floor. They went for long walks around the block, David grumbling about the cold, while Max bounded happily through the snow, leaving behind tiny paw prints in the frost. In the evenings, David would settle into his worn-out recliner, Max curling up beside him with his head resting against the old man's knee. Some nights, David found himself talking, to Max, to the empty house, to the ghost of Claire who still lingered in the quiet corners of his mind. For the first time in a long while, David wasn't alone, but fate had a way of creeping in when least expected. The bitter cold. That night, winter had tightened its grip on the town. The wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling window panes and piling fresh snow against doorsteps. David sat in his recliner, a thick blanket draped over his lap. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Max lay curled up on the rug nearby, his fur warm and golden under the firelight. The old man took a sip of his coffee, exhaling slowly. He should have gone to bed an hour ago, but something nagged at him. He frowned, listening. The pipes. Somewhere outside, beneath the layers of ice and frost, the old water pipes were groaning, a low, uneven sound that sent a flicker of concern through him. David sighed, setting his cup down with a soft clink. He knew he shouldn't be out in this weather. Not at his age, not with the wind cutting through the air like a blade. But the last thing he needed was a frozen pipe bursting in the middle of the night. Max lifted his head as David pushed himself up from the chair, his joints protesting the movement. "Relax, kid," he muttered, ruffling the dog's fur as he reached for his coat. "I'll be back in a minute." Max whined, his tail giving a nervous flick. David chuckled. "I'll be fine." Famous last words. The moment everything changed. The cold was harsher than he had expected. The wind bit at his face, the snow beneath his boots crunching with each step as he made his way to the side of the house. The sky above was black, the streetlights casting a dim, yellow glow across the frozen landscape. David crouched near the foundation, rubbing his hands together for warmth before pulling out his flashlight. The pipes looked frosted over, but not completely frozen. Not yet, anyway. If he could just adjust the insulation, he might be able to prevent them from bursting. He reached out, fingers stiff with cold and pain. A sharp, searing pain shot through his chest, stealing the breath from his lungs. It was as if a fist had clenched around his heart, squeezing until every muscle locked, every nerve screamed. David sucked in a ragged gasp. The flashlight slipped from his grip, landing in the snow with a dull thud. His knees buckled, the world tilted, and then darkness. A desperate cry in the night. Inside the house, Max's ears perked up. Something was wrong. The cold wind howled against the windows, but Max didn't hear his owner's footsteps returning, didn't hear the door creak open, didn't hear the usual grumble of "damn weather," followed by David stomping the snow from his boots. Only silence. Then a faint muffled sound. Max was on his feet in an instant, his body tense. He ran to the door, ears straining, nose pressed against the wood. Then he smelled it, the sharp, unmistakable scent of David mixed with something else. Something wrong. Without hesitation, Max began to bark. Not his usual playful bark. This was different, urgent, desperate, a cry for help. The bitter wind howled through the trees, swirling fresh snow across the frozen ground. The world was silent, too silent, except for the frantic barking of a desperate dog. Max's paws pounded against the icy ground as he bolted through the yard, his breath coming in quick, panicked huffs. His instincts screamed at him. Something was terribly wrong. David was out there, somewhere in the snow, and he wasn't moving. But Max was just a dog. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't open doors. He couldn't do anything except run, so that's exactly what he did. A desperate search for help. The wind was merciless, whipping through his golden fur, stinging his nose and eyes, but Max didn't stop. He knew where to go. David's closest neighbor, Helen Carter, lived just a few houses down. Max had seen David talk to her on occasion, exchanging quick greetings over the fence. He didn't know much about her, except that she sometimes brought David fresh-baked bread and always had a kind smile. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting to her before it was too late. Pounding on the door. Max skidded to a halt at Helen's front door, his claws scraping against the wooden porch. He jumped up, pressing his paws against the door, barking with everything he had. Bang, bang, bang! His claws raked against the doorframe, his tail stiff, his ears pinned back. His whole body shook with urgency. But nothing happened. No lights turned on, no footsteps, no one was coming. Max let out a sharp, frustrated whine, then threw himself against the door again, harder, louder, more desperate. Bang, bang, bang. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, there was a shuffle inside. A light flicked on. The door creaked open just enough for a frail, elderly woman to peek out. "Max?" Helen's tired voice was laced with confusion. "What on earth?" But then she saw his face, his wild, frantic eyes, the way his fur bristled with urgency, the way he kept turning, looking back toward David's house. Helen's breath caught. Something was wrong. Following Max through the snow. "David?" she whispered, but of course Max couldn't answer. Instead, he whined loudly, then turned and took off into the snow. Helen didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat, slipping it over her nightgown, and rushed after him, her heart pounding. She could barely keep up. Max tore through the snow like a bullet, his paws kicking up white powder, his focus locked straight ahead. Helen, struggling against the wind, followed as quickly as she could, and then she saw him. A dark shape half buried in the snow, lying motionless. Helen gasped. "Oh, Lord!" She stumbled forward, dropping to her knees beside David's still form. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue, his breath so faint she had to lean in to even hear it. "David! David, can you hear me?" Her voice shook with fear, but there was no response. For a terrifying moment she thought she was too late. But then his eyelids fluttered. A small, weak sound escaped his lips. Hope surged through her. She scrambled for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed for help. 911. What's your emergency? "It's my neighbor!" Helen cried. "He collapsed in the snow. I think he's having a heart attack. He's barely breathing. Please, hurry!" The dispatcher's voice was calm, but urgent. "Help is on the way. Stay with him and try to keep him warm." Helen barely heard the instructions. Her focus was on David. She tore off her coat and laid it over his chest, trying to shield him from the cold. Then she looked at Max, who had never left his side. The dog had curled himself against David's body, pressing close, his warm fur acting as a shield against the deadly chill. His head rested against the old man's arm, his eyes locked onto his face, as if begging him to wake up. Helen's throat tightened. This dog had saved his life. Sirens in the night. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the frozen silence. Red and blue lights flashed against the snow, reflecting off the icicles hanging from the roof. Paramedics rushed forward, lifting David onto a stretcher. One of them checked his pulse, then turned to Helen. "He's alive," he said, "but barely. If he'd been out here much longer—" He didn't have to finish. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Max, who was still standing beside the stretcher, his tail low, his eyes never leaving David. One of the paramedics crouched down, giving the dog a small, knowing smile. "This little guy's a hero." Helen reached down and stroked Max's head. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, he is." And as the ambulance doors closed and the sirens wailed once more, Max jumped into the passenger seat of Helen's car. He wasn't going home until David did. The days that followed were long and quiet. David was in the hospital recovering from the heart attack that nearly took his life. He wasn't awake long enough to hold conversations, and even when he was, the doctors insisted he rest as much as possible. Machines beeped softly around him, and the sterile white walls felt nothing like home. But home was waiting for him. Max was waiting for him. Back at David's house, the golden retriever paced near the front door every evening, ears twitching at the sound of passing cars, tail lowering each time the door remained closed. Helen, still shaken by the night she found David in the snow, had taken it upon herself to care for Max. She made sure he had food and fresh water, stopping by twice a day to sit with him for a while. But Max didn't want food. He barely wanted water. All he wanted was for David to walk through that door again. Every evening, Max would curl up on the old flannel jacket David had left on the couch, the same one the man had wrapped around him the day they met. He would press his nose against it, inhale deeply, and sigh, waiting, always waiting. A dark presence in the night. The neighborhood was quiet that night, the air still, the cold lingering in the air, even as spring threatened to take over winter's reign. Max had just settled into his usual spot near Helen's couch, his eyes growing heavy with sleep, when his ears perked up. Something was off. The golden retriever lifted his head, nose twitching. His body went rigid, his fur bristling. A sound, a faint shuffling coming from outside. Max's sharp instincts kicked in immediately. He pushed himself up, his ears standing alert, his muscles tensing. Through the dim light, filtering in from the street lamp, he saw a shadow move near Helen's front window, a figure moving slowly, deliberately. Someone was outside. and they weren't supposed to be. The intruder. Max growled low in his throat, a deep, primal sound that sent vibrations through his chest. His tail went stiff, his stance shifting into something defensive, ready. Then, a soft click. The back door. Someone was trying to get inside. Max's growl deepened. His lips curled back, exposing sharp, white teeth. His instincts screamed danger, and he was ready to protect. The door creaked open an inch, then two. Then, Max launched himself forward. With a ferocious bark, he lunged toward the shadowy figure, his body a blur of golden fur and raw determination. His paws skidded against the hardwood floor as he charged toward the door, his bark ringing through the silent night like an alarm bell. The intruder froze. For a split second, all Max saw was wide, startled eyes caught in the dim glow of the streetlight. Then panic. The man stumbled backward, his hands flailing as Max's furious snarls echoed through the yard. He turned on his heel, sprinting back into the darkness, his shoes crunching against the frozen grass. Max didn't stop barking until the sound of retreating footsteps faded completely. Only then did he stand still, chest heaving, ears pricked toward the empty night. He had done it. He had chased the danger away. The aftermath. The barking had woken Helen. She rushed into the living room, clutching her robe around her shoulders, her eyes wild with alarm. "Max!" she called. "What's going on?" Max turned to her, his tail still raised, his ears flicking toward the back door. Helen followed his gaze, then gasped. The door was ajar. Helen's hands shook as she stepped forward, slowly pushing it closed. She flicked on the outside light, scanning the yard for movement. Nothing. But the footprints in the snow told her everything she needed to know. Someone had been there. Someone had tried to break in, and Max had stopped them. She turned back toward the golden retriever, her breath still unsteady. He was standing tall, eyes sharp, his entire body still vibrating with tension. Then, as if sensing that the danger had passed, Max relaxed, his tail giving a single, soft wag. Helen slowly sank into a chair, pressing a hand over her racing heart. "Good boy," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Max, you just saved my life." Max stepped forward and rested his head gently against her lap, letting out a small, tired sigh. Helen wiped away a tear. She had known Max was special, but now she knew he was so much more. A quiet hero. The police arrived soon after, called by Helen as soon as she could steady her hands enough to dial. They confirmed what she already knew. A break-in attempt. The intruder was gone, but Max had stopped whatever could have happened next. The officers gave Max a few pats on the head, calling him a hero. One of them even said, "Wish we had more dogs like this on the force." Helen just smiled, her heart still pounding from the reality of what had just happened. And yet, all Max did was sit quietly at her feet, his tail giving a soft thump against the floor. He didn't care about being called a hero. He had only done what David had once done for him. He had protected someone who needed him. He had saved a life, and he would do it again. The seasons changed, as they always did. Winter loosened its grip, and the icy streets melted into flowing gutters. Buds formed on the branches, soft green peeking through the frost-bitten landscape. Birds returned to the sky, filling the air with morning songs, and the world seemed to breathe again. And so did David. His recovery had been slow, painful, frustratingly slow, but he had made it. Thanks to Max, thanks to his best friend. Walking side by side again. The first day David was strong enough to walk outside, Max was ecstatic. The golden retriever bounded around the yard, tail wagging wildly, his entire body radiating pure, unfiltered joy. To him, it had been too long since he and David had walked together, and he wasn't going to let him forget it. All right, David chuckled, adjusting his jacket. "Calm down, kid. I'm not running a marathon here." Max didn't calm down. He practically danced in circles, his paws kicking up soft tufts of earth, his excitement contagious. David shook his head, but he couldn't help but smile. It felt good to be outside again, The fresh air, the warm sun, the weight of Max's leash in his hand. It was a life he almost lost, but one he had been given back. Because of Max. The dog that had once been discarded like trash had become his lifeline. A familiar question. They strolled through the quiet neighborhood, the same one they had walked through hundreds of times before. But today, it felt different, because David was different. He passed by a small shop, one he used to visit back when Claire was still alive. An old friend stood outside, chatting with a few folks on the sidewalk. When he spotted David, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, grinning. "They finally let you out, huh?" David chuckled. "Guess they got tired of me hogging a hospital bed." The man's gaze drifted down to Max, who stood tall and proud at David's side, ears perked, tail wagging. "I heard what happened," the man said, nodding toward the retriever. "That dog of yours, he saved your life." David looked at Max. The golden retriever met his gaze, his warm brown eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond words. And in that moment, David knew the truth. He looked back at his friend, a slow smile forming. "No one saved anyone," he said simply, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ear. "We saved each other." The life they were meant to have. From that day forward, David and Max were inseparable. They took their morning walks again just like they always had. David no longer came home to an empty house, no longer woke up to silence. Max was always there, his golden fur a comforting presence, his tail wagging at the first sign of daylight. And David? David laughed more. He grumbled less. He lived. And when he sat in his recliner at night, Max curled up beside him, head resting on his knee, David would reach down, stroke his fur and whisper, "Thank you, kid." Not because Max had saved his life, but because Max had given him a reason to keep living it. Life often throws us into storms we never saw coming, making us feel abandoned, lost, or forgotten. But God's grace moves in ways we cannot always see. His miracles often come not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, faithful presence of those he places in our lives. Sometimes it's in the form of a stranger's kindness, sometimes it's in the loyalty of a friend, and sometimes it's in the unwavering love of a dog who refuses to give up on us. David thought he was saving Max when he pulled him from the trash that cold morning. But in the years that followed, Max became more than just a rescued dog. He became the very hands of God's grace. Twice, when David needed him the most, Max was there. A reminder that no one is ever truly alone. A reminder that love, loyalty, and faith can be found in the most unexpected places. So treasure those who walk into your life, whether they have 2 legs or 4. Because one day, when you least expect it, they might be the very miracle God sends to save you. May God bless those with kind hearts, and may the loyalty of a good dog always light the way. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love and faithfulness still exist in this world. A freezing night, an empty truck stop, and a stray puppy gripping a black bag in its mouth. Sam Carter had seen a lot in his years on the road, but nothing like this. The puppy wouldn't let go, wouldn't leave his side. And when the storm rolled in, something told Sam that turning his back wasn't an option. But the moment he let that dog into his truck, the real storm began. What was inside the bag? And why did it feel like someone was watching? Sometimes fate chooses for us, and sometimes it comes with a price. Stay with us. This is just the beginning. The wind howled through the empty parking lot of an old gas station, carrying flurries of snow that swirled aimlessly in the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. It was a bitterly cold night, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter and hurry along without a second glance. But not everyone could leave. A small golden retriever puppy, thin to the bone, stumbled through the snow-covered pavement, its tiny paws numb against the frozen ground. Its fur, once golden, was now matted with dirt and ice, sticking to its frail body. It was weak, exhausted, and desperately hungry, but still it held on tightly to a small, tattered black bag clamped between its teeth. The bag was old, frayed at the edges, as if it had been carried for miles. The puppy refused to let go, no matter how cold or tired it was. One by one, cars pulled into the gas station, refueled and sped away, their headlights casting brief beams of hope that vanished as quickly as they appeared. No one noticed the shivering little creature trying to find warmth near the diesel pumps. Then, a red Peterbilt 389 truck rolled into the station. Its engine rumbled low, the sound of a machine that had seen thousands of miles. The driver, Sam Carter, stepped out, pulling his jacket tight against the biting wind. His face was worn, lined with years of solitude and endless highways. Sam was a man who kept to himself. He had no patience for strays, human or animal. He was here to refuel, grab a cup of coffee, and be on his way. But then he saw it. The puppy. It stood a few feet away, staring up at him with large, weary eyes. Eyes that had seen too much for something so small. Sam exhaled, watching his breath swirl in the freezing air. "Not my problem," he muttered, turning away. But the puppy took a step closer, then another, and then without warning, it jumped onto the truck's step, scrambling clumsily but with fierce determination. It was shaking, but it refused to back down. Sam's brows furrowed. "Oh, for crying out loud!" He reached out to shoo it away, but the puppy didn't flinch. Instead, it tightened its grip on the black bag, as if daring him to ignore it. There was something about that bag. Sam hesitated. He was tired. He was supposed to be halfway to the next town by now. He didn't have time for this. But then the storm hit. The sky roared, the wind picked up, and within minutes, the roads were nearly invisible under thick sheets of snow. The gas station emptied out as travelers scrambled for shelter. Sam knew there was no way he'd be driving anywhere in this weather. With a reluctant sigh, he swung the truck door open. "All right, fine, just for the night," he grumbled. The puppy climbed inside without hesitation, curling up near the passenger seat, still clutching the black bag as if it were its only lifeline. The black bag. That night, the snowstorm raged on, turning the world outside into a vast white void. Sam sat in his cabin, sipping coffee from a battered thermos, watching the wind slam against the windshield. The puppy lay curled up beside him, small body rising and falling with slow, exhausted breaths. But it wasn't sleeping. It was watching him. Then, without a sound, it nudged the black bag toward him. Sam frowned. "What? You want me to open it?" The puppy let out a small whimper, its eyes pleading. Sam sighed, setting his coffee aside. "All right, let's see what's so special about this thing." Carefully, he unzipped the worn bag. Inside, he found 3 things. 1, a small, faded photograph, a little girl, no older than 6, smiling as she hugged a fluffy golden retriever puppy. This puppy. 2, a worn dog collar, its metal tag scratched but still readable. Buddy. 3, a crumpled piece of paper, stained and torn at the edges. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. "Please take care of her." Sam's stomach twisted. He flipped the photograph over, and there on the back was a bloody fingerprint. A storm of questions. Sam's grip tightened around the photo. Who was the girl? Where was she now? And more importantly, who wrote this note? Sam looked at the puppy, at Buddy. The little dog hadn't moved, still staring at him with those impossibly sad eyes. Sam let out a breath, running a hand through his graying hair. This was getting too weird. Maybe the girl was just a kid who lost her puppy. Maybe this was nothing more than a pet left behind by a family on the move. But the bloody fingerprint, something about it made his gut twist in a way he didn't like. A strong gust of wind rattled the truck. The world outside was buried in snow, isolating them from everything else. Sam could still feel the weight of the puppy's gaze, and for the first time in years he felt uneasy. Something told him that letting this puppy into his truck was the beginning of something much bigger, and possibly something dangerous. Sam couldn't sleep. The wind outside battered against the truck, making it groan under the force of the storm. Snow piled up on the windshield, blurring the world beyond. Inside the cabin, the heater hummed, but the warmth did little to ease the unease growing inside him. The puppy lay curled up on the passenger seat, its breaths slow and shallow. It had finally drifted off, but even in sleep it held tightly onto the black bag. Sam barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, his eyes locked onto the photograph in his hands. There was something about the little girl in the picture, something familiar. He frowned, pulling out his phone. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he had to be sure. He opened his browser and started searching. Missing child cases. Chicago. It took a moment for the results to load, the weak signal struggling in the storm, and then he felt his chest tighten. Emily Harper, 6 years old, missing for 2 weeks. Sam's grip on the phone tightened as he read through the article. The police had discovered the bodies of her parents in their home, both murdered. The front door had been left open, blood smeared across the floor. But Emily was gone. No signs of forced entry, no ransom demands, just silence. Authorities believed she had been kidnapped, but there were no leads, no suspects. The case had gone cold. Sam slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the storm outside. The girl in the picture wasn't just lost. She had vanished. And somehow her dog had survived, carrying a bag with her photo and a desperate plea for help. His stomach twisted. He had stepped into something much bigger than he had realized. He looked at the puppy, Buddy. The little dog twitched in its sleep, whimpering softly, as if haunted by something only it could remember. Had it been there? Had it seen what happened to Emily and her parents? Had it been running ever since? Sam let out a slow breath. He was just a trucker, not a cop, not a detective. This wasn't his problem. He should take the dog to a shelter, drop the photo off at a police station and move on. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this had happened for a reason. Something wasn't right. His eyes drifted back to the photograph. The bloody fingerprint on the back of the paper. Someone had left that message knowing it would be found, knowing someone would have to make a choice. And Sam Carter had never been the kind of man to ignore a call for help. The blizzard was finally easing when he turned the key in the ignition. He wasn't heading to his next job anymore. He was going to Chicago. The truck rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. Buddy stirred, blinking up at him before curling tighter around the black bag. Sam was about to shift into gear when his phone lit up. A blocked number. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he picked it up. Yeah? For a second, there was nothing, just static. Then a voice. Low, cold, controlled. Turn around, Carter. You don't want to be a part of this. Sam's blood ran cold. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. Who the hell is this? Click. The call disconnected. Sam lowered the phone, staring at it, then glanced around the parking lot through the frost-covered windows. Had someone been watching him? A chill crawled down his spine, but this time it had nothing to do with the cold. He had just been warned. But instead of scaring him off, it only made one thing clearer. He wasn't turning around. He was going to find out the truth, and if someone wanted to stop him, they were going to have to try harder than that. The morning light cut through the remnants of the storm, revealing a world still blanketed in snow. The once howling winds had died down to a whisper, and the roads, though still treacherous, were passable again. Sam Carter rubbed his tired eyes, his body aching from a restless night. His mind had been spinning ever since he found that photo, the missing girl, the bloody fingerprint, and the dog that had somehow ended up in his truck. It was time to let the authorities handle it. He decided to drive to the nearest police station. If anyone could make sense of what was going on, it was them. But the moment he stepped out of the truck stop, a feeling of unease crept over him. Something was wrong. The violation. Sam's truck was parked right where he left it, but something about it felt off. Then he saw it. The door wasn't fully closed. A sudden wave of tension rippled through his body. He had locked that door. He was sure of it. His boots crunched through the snow as he approached cautiously, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. He reached out, slowly pulling the door open. Inside, the cabin was a mess. Someone had been here. The seats were disturbed, his glove compartment hanging open, papers scattered across the floor. But the worst part, a set of footprints on the truck's mat, not his. Sam's pulse quickened. He scanned the interior. His wallet was still in the center console, his keys, his tools, all untouched. Except for one thing. The black bag was gone. His stomach twisted. That bag had been with the dog the whole time. Whoever had broken into his truck wasn't looking for money. They were looking for that bag. And now they had it. Sam's hands clenched into fists. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The black SUV. A black SUV sat at the far end of the lot, its windows tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. It was parked at an angle, as if its driver had been watching. His instincts screamed at him. Sam took a slow step toward it, his boots crunching through the ice. He didn't know what he was going to do, confront them, demand answers. Whoever they were, they had just broken into his truck. But before he could get closer, the engine roared to life. The SUV peeled out of the lot, tires skidding on the icy pavement before it disappeared onto the highway. Sam didn't even get a look at the driver. He cursed under his breath. He had no license plate number, no identifying marks, just the memory of that dark, waiting vehicle. But one thing was clear. Someone else was looking for Emily Harper, and they were willing to steal from his truck to cover their tracks. The puppy nose. Sam turned back toward the truck, his jaw tight. He climbed into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind him. Buddy was awake now, curled up in the passenger seat, his small body trembling. The puppy's eyes darted toward the empty space where the black bag used to be. He let out a soft, whimpering sound, his ears pressed flat against his head. Sam exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "You knew that bag was important," he muttered, half to himself, half to the dog. Buddy looked up at him, his eyes wide and full of something Sam could only describe as understanding. The dog had chosen to bring that bag to him. He had tried to protect it, and now it was gone. Sam shook his head. He was standing at a crossroad, and he knew it. Whoever stole the bag had wanted something inside it badly enough to track it down. That meant the answers weren't in his hands anymore. But the people who had them, they were out there. And if they were looking for the bag, there was a good chance they were looking for Emily too. A small voice in his head whispered, "Walk away. It's not your fight." But Sam knew himself too well. He had driven thousands of miles through the heart of the country, seen all kinds of people, good, bad, and everything in between. But he had never been the kind of man to turn his back on someone who needed help. He started the truck. The engine rumbled to life, sending a vibration through the seat. Buddy didn't move. He just sat there, staring at him. Sam glanced at the dog one last time before shifting into gear. "All right, kid," he muttered. "Looks like we're going to Chicago." The truck pulled onto the highway, heading straight into the unknown. Sam didn't know how deep this mystery went. He didn't know who was following him. But one thing was certain. That puppy hadn't chosen the wrong truck. Not at all. Sam Carter had seen a lot in his time. 30 years on the road had taught him how to handle all sorts of trouble. Thieves at truck stops, violent storms that swallowed highways whole, and long nights where exhaustion clawed at his mind. But this was something different. The truck's engine roared beneath him as he sped down the interstate toward Chicago. The sky was a dull, pale gray, the remnants of the storm still lingering in the air. Snow-covered fields stretched endlessly on either side of the road, broken only by the occasional exit sign or an abandoned gas station. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. Someone had stolen the black bag, but they hadn't taken everything. The photograph of Emily Harper was still in his pocket, along with the handwritten message. "Please take care of her." Sam pulled it out, glancing at it again, as if the answer might suddenly appear in front of him. The little girl in the photo was still missing, and the people responsible for that weren't just willing to hide the truth, they were willing to kill for it. His gut told him he had just stepped into something much bigger than a simple missing child case, and he wasn't sure he was ready for where it would lead. A quiet passenger. From the passenger seat, Buddy sat motionless, his small body tense. His eyes flicked between Sam and the snowy road ahead, ears perked, as if he too understood the weight of what was happening. Sam exhaled. "You knew that bag was important, didn't you, kid?" Buddy didn't move, but his tail gave the faintest flick, almost like a nod. Sam shook his head, turning back to the road. "I hope you've got more answers than I do." But that was the problem. He had nothing to go on. No leads, no idea who had taken the bag. Just a stolen truck stop clue, a missing girl, and a dog that refused to let go of the past. Sam pressed harder on the gas. If he was going to figure this out, he had to start somewhere. A search for answers. Hours passed. The landscape changed from open stretches of frozen farmland to the industrial outskirts of Chicago. Sam wasn't heading straight to the police. Not yet. Something told him the people responsible were already watching. If they had been willing to break into his truck, what else were they capable of? He needed information, and there was only one place he could think of where truckers like him went to trade stories, favors, and sometimes information no one else could find. The Blue Lantern truck stop. It was an old place, wedged between two highways and surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers, the kind of spot where truckers could eat, fuel up, and talk without being noticed by the outside world. Sam pulled in, his tires crunching over the salt-covered pavement. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and cigarette smoke. The lighting was dim, the booths old and cracked. A radio hummed in the background, but no one was really listening. A handful of truckers sat scattered throughout, their faces worn, their voices low. They were the kind of men who saw everything but said nothing unless they had a reason to. Sam took a seat at the counter, nodding at the waitress who approached. "Coffee," he said. She poured it without a word. As he sipped the hot liquid, he scanned the room. He needed to be careful. The wrong question to the wrong person could bring more trouble than he was already in. After a few minutes, a voice spoke from beside him. "You look like hell, Carter." Sam turned to see a familiar face, Ray Delaney, a fellow trucker, older than Sam but just as road-worn, the kind of guy who knew a little about everything happening along America's highways. Sam gave him a nod. "You seen any black SUVs lurking around truck stops lately?" Ray raised an eyebrow. "Not usually the kind of thing you ask over coffee." "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Ray studied him for a moment, then took a slow sip of his own coffee. "You in trouble?" "Maybe." Ray exhaled. "Well, I did see one about a day ago up near I-55. Blacked out windows, government-type looking thing. But here's the weird part." He leaned in slightly. Whoever was driving wasn't just watching people. They were asking about someone. Sam stiffened. "Who?" Ray hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "A trucker, driving a red Peterbilt." A slow chill ran through Sam's veins. They weren't just watching. They were looking for him. Nowhere to run. Sam set down his coffee, his pulse steady but his mind racing. If they knew his truck, they knew where he was going. And if they knew that, then Emily Harper was in more danger than he had realized. He stood, pulling a few bills from his pocket and placing them on the counter. "Appreciate it, Ray." Ray narrowed his eyes. "You sure you don't need help?" Sam shook his head. "Not yet." Buddy followed close at his heels as they stepped out into the cold again. The sun was setting now, the sky turning from grey to deep blue. The streets were getting quieter. And then he saw it. Across the parking lot, a black SUV sat idling near the gas pumps. They were here. Sam didn't wait. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and without hesitation, pulled out onto the highway. The SUV didn't follow immediately. It waited, lingering in the lot, as if considering its next move. Then its headlights flicked on, and it began to follow. Sam tightened his grip on the wheel. This wasn't over. Whoever these people were, they had stolen the bag. They had taken the first step. Now it was his turn. He was done running. Whatever the truth was, he was going to find it. And if they thought they could scare him off, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The city lights of Chicago loomed in the distance, a cold glow against the darkening sky. The highway stretched ahead, slick from melted snow, dotted with the occasional headlights of late-night travelers. Sam tightened his grip on the wheel, his gaze flicking between the road and his rearview mirror. He needed to think. Someone had stolen the black bag, but if they thought that was enough to make him back off, they were dead wrong. He still had the photograph. He still had Buddy. And most of all, he still had questions. Too many. A sudden silence. He pulled into a small roadside stop, a place that had clearly seen better days. The old gas pumps were rusted, the convenience store flickering with dying fluorescent lights. Sam cut the engine and grabbed his phone. He needed to get ahead of this before it got worse. The moment he unlocked it, a news update flashed across the screen. Emily Harper still missing. No new leads. Police urge anyone with information to come forward. Sam exhaled, then dialed 911. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then, silence. The call dropped. Sam frowned and tried again. Nothing. What the hell? He muttered, tapping the screen. His signal had vanished. He glanced at his GPS unit, also dead. Now that was no accident. His instincts kicked in. Something was happening. Then movement in the mirror. The black SUV had returned. The chase begins. The moment Sam saw the blacked-out vehicle, his pulse quickened. It was the same SUV from before. It had found him again. Beside him, Buddy let out a soft whimper. "Yeah, I see them, kid," Sam muttered. The SUV stayed behind him for a moment, maintaining a calculated distance. Then its headlights flashed twice. Sam tensed. A warning? A threat? Either way, he wasn't about to wait around to find out. "If you want to play," he muttered, "then let's play." He slammed his foot on the gas. The Peterbilt 389 roared, its massive frame surging forward, tires kicking up slush as it shot onto the highway. But the SUV kept up. Not just kept up, gained on him. Under fire. Sam's truck was fast, but the SUV was faster. Then, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. His side mirror shattered, glass spraying onto the dashboard. "Damn it!" Sam hissed. Buddy yelped, curling into the seat. Sam's mind raced. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. They were trying to take him out. He needed to lose them. Now. Up ahead, a narrow service road branched off the highway, disappearing into the shadows. He took the risk. Yanking the wheel hard right, Sam veered off the main road, tires screaming as the truck barreled down the isolated path. The SUV followed. Sam's headlights cut through the darkness, revealing a row of abandoned warehouses, rusted, broken structures standing like forgotten giants. He spotted an opening between two of them. It was tight, but it would have to do. Cutting the lights, he swerved into the alley, pressing the brakes just enough to skid the massive truck into position, hidden in the shadows. Then, silence. The waiting game. Sam held his breath. The SUV roared past, its tires screeching as it overshot the turn. They hadn't seen him. Not yet. Through the windshield, Sam watched their red taillights flicker in the distance, then disappear as the vehicle kept moving. He let out a slow breath. After a few minutes, when he was sure they were gone, he turned to Buddy, who was still trembling in the seat. Sam ran a hand down the dog's back, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath his fur. "Looks like they weren't after you, kid," he murmured. "Not this time." But that only made the question worse. If they weren't after Buddy, that meant they were after him. And if that was the case, then whoever these people were, they knew exactly who he was. The pieces start to fit. Sam sat in silence, putting the puzzle together. They had stolen the black bag. They had wiped his phone signal. They had tracked him down, twice. And now they were willing to kill him. It all came back to one thing, the photo of Emily Harper. Sam pulled it from his pocket, studying the image once more. Emily's smiling face, the bloody fingerprint on the back, and a single overwhelming thought. Whoever left this photo, they knew what was coming. Whoever had written that note, they knew he would be in danger. But why him? Why had this all led back to his truck? Sam clenched his jaw. He didn't have the answers, but he was going to find them. He started the truck again, glancing at Buddy, who was still watching him, eyes filled with something eerily close to trust. "We're not done yet, kid," Sam muttered. Then he shifted into gear and pulled out onto the road. This time, he wasn't just heading to Chicago, he was hunting for the truth, and nothing was going to stop him. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the distant glow of Chicago on the horizon. Sam Carter's mind raced as his fingers absent-mindedly tapped the steering wheel. His body was exhausted, but his thoughts refused to slow down. Something about this case had been gnawing at him ever since he first found that black bag. And now, with the bag stolen and armed men chasing him down, he needed to figure out why, before it was too late. Then a memory surfaced. The note, the one that had been inside the bag. Sam had read the message before. Please take care of her. But something about it still bothered him. He had been so focused on the photograph and the blood-stained fingerprint that he hadn't given the note a second thought. What if there was more to it? His free hand dug into his jacket pocket, pulling out the crumpled piece of paper. He smoothed it out against his leg and squinted in the dim cabin light. At first, nothing looked unusual, but then a small, faint stain caught his eye. It was barely noticeable, just a faint smudge, but something about it seemed off. Slowly, Sam rubbed his thumb over the stain, pressing it against the light. And right there, beneath the original handwriting, a second line of text began to emerge. It had been hidden beneath the ink. A cold knot formed in Sam's stomach as he read the new words, H Industries ID 027. A name in the shadows. Sam stared at the note, his pulse pounding in his ears. H Industries. He had never heard of it before, but something told him it was important. Reaching for his phone, he typed the name into a search engine. Nothing. Sam's frown deepened. A company with no records, no website, no business listings, that wasn't normal. But when he added H Industries plus missing person to the search bar, a single news article appeared. It was old, buried beneath years of forgotten reports. But when Sam clicked on it, his breath caught. H Industries private company under investigation for missing children cases. Investigation closed without conclusion. The article was vague, but it confirmed what Sam already feared. This wasn't just about Emily Harper. This wasn't just about a kidnapped child. This was about something bigger, something that had been happening for years, and someone had tried to bury it. Sam clenched his jaw. His instincts had been right all along. This wasn't a normal missing person case. Emily could have been one of many, and whoever took her, they weren't just criminals. They were organized. They had power, and they had just tried to kill him to keep him from finding out. Sam exhaled, his grip tightening on the note. No wonder they had stolen the black bag. But they had made a mistake. They thought they had taken away his only lead, but they had left this. A decision he couldn't ignore. Sam looked over at Buddy, who was curled up beside him, still awake. The dog's dark eyes watched him as if waiting for him to say something. Sam let out a slow breath. "Well, kid," he muttered, "looks like we just got our next destination." The dog's ears twitched. Sam reached for his GPS, tapping in a new search. It didn't take long. The article had mentioned an old headquarters, a facility located on the outskirts of Chicago, shut down after the investigation. If there were still answers left to find, that was where they would be. His truck rumbled as he pulled back onto the highway, leaving behind the empty roadside stop. The city was close now, and something told Sam he wasn't the only one heading there. The people who had stolen the black bag, they were already waiting, and this time, they wouldn't just try to scare him off. The truck rumbled down an abandoned road, its tires crunching over loose gravel. The city lights of Chicago were now far behind, replaced by a vast, empty landscape. Ahead, standing alone in the darkness, was the last known address of H Industries, an old warehouse forgotten by time. Sam parked the truck a short distance away, cutting the engine. Silence settled over the area like a heavy fog. He turned to Buddy, who sat rigid on the passenger seat, ears perked, nose twitching. "Stay here, kid," Sam muttered, reaching into the glove compartment. his fingers wrapped around the cold grip of a revolver. He wasn't taking any chances. Then, stepping out into the night, he made his way toward the building. Something about this place felt wrong, like it wasn't abandoned at all. Inside the warehouse. The large metal doors creaked as Sam forced them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but something told him people had been here recently. He took a step forward. Scattered across the concrete floor were old machines, stacks of computer monitors, and rows of locked filing cabinets. And then a light was on at the far end of the warehouse. Sam's grip on his gun tightened. Someone was here. A faint sound. Then he heard it, a weak, muffled sound. Sam froze. It was faint, barely a whisper against the cold air, but it was there, a whimper, a child's whimper. His pulse spiked. Gun raised, he moved quickly through the maze of equipment, following the sound. When he reached the source, his breath caught. There, in a metal cage on the floor, was Emily Harper. Finding Emily. She was small, too thin, her blonde hair tangled, her face pale, but she was alive. Sam dropped to one knee. "Emily?" His voice was low, cautious. The girl blinked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," he said. "I'm here to get you out." Emily didn't move at first. Then her gaze flickered behind him. Sam sensed it before he heard it. A voice. "We knew you'd come, Carter." The man in the suit. Sam turned, his gun instantly raised. A man stood in the doorway, a tall figure in a black suit, his expression unreadable, cold, calculating. "You've walked into something far bigger than you understand," the man said. "H Industries isn't just a name, it's an operation." Sam's finger tightened on the trigger. "I don't care who you are, I'm taking the kid." The man smiled faintly, unfazed. "I'm afraid I can't let that happen. But perhaps we can come to an understanding." Sam didn't flinch. "I don't make deals with kidnappers." The man tilted his head. "Kidnapping?" He let out a quiet laugh. "Is that what you think this is?" Sam's jaw clenched. "Then tell me, what the hell is going on?" The man took a slow step forward. "Emily Harper," he said, voice smooth as glass, "isn't just some missing child. She is special." Sam didn't like the way he said that word. "She was part of something bigger, Carter. Something that started long before you picked up that stray dog." Sam's gun didn't waver. "And now?" The man exhaled. "And now, I'm offering you a choice." The offer. Sam could feel Emily's frightened gaze on him. The man continued. "You leave," he said. "Forget you ever found this place. Forget you ever heard of H Industries." Sam's expression remained stone cold. "And if I don't?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then neither of you leave at all." Sam didn't respond. He was calculating, watching, waiting. Then a growl, a blur of movement. "Buddy." The attack. The puppy launched itself from the darkness, teeth bared, snapping onto the man's wrist. The man shouted in pain and surprise, stumbling back. Sam didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, he drove his fist into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. No second chances, no hesitation. Sam grabbed Emily, lifting her into his arms. "Time to go, kid." He sprinted toward the exit, Buddy right at his heels. Behind them, alarms began to blare. They had seconds before reinforcements arrived, but Sam didn't look back. The only thing that mattered was getting Emily out of here. The escape. Sam shoved open the warehouse doors, cold night air rushing in. The truck was waiting, engine still warm. He yanked the passenger door open, setting Emily inside before climbing in himself. Buddy leapt in after them. Then a single gunshot rang out. A bullet tore through the side mirror, missing Sam by inches. He slammed the truck into gear. The Peterbilt roared onto the road, leaving the warehouse in the dust. Through the mirror, Sam saw black SUVs speeding toward them from the distance. They had escaped, but this wasn't over. The truth remains. Emily sat quietly, clutching Buddy, her small hands shaking. Sam kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing. He had found the girl, but the real question was, what had he just uncovered? H. Industries wasn't just some abandoned company. It was a secret someone was willing to kill to protect, and now they knew his name. Sam exhaled. This was bigger than him now, and there was no turning back. Chapter 8. The end, or just the beginning. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a dark ribbon cutting through the silent countryside. Sam Carter's truck thundered forward, its headlights carving through the night. In the back seat, Emily Harper slept, her small body curled beneath Sam's heavy jacket. She barely stirred, her face peaceful despite the chaos she had just escaped. Beside her, Buddy lay awake. The puppy's dark eyes flicked towards Sam, his body pressed close to the girl, his tiny frame still tense. Sam glanced into the rearview mirror. No lights, no movement. For now, they were alone. He let out a slow breath, loosening his grip on the wheel. But the relief didn't last long. A nagging feeling crept up his spine. Something felt off. His instincts had kept him alive on the road for years, and right now they were screaming at him. The collar. Sam's gaze shifted toward Buddy, and that's when he noticed it. The puppy still had Emily's old collar clamped in his tiny jaws, the only thing left from the stolen black bag. Sam frowned. The dog hadn't let it go once, not since the moment they escaped. Why? His pulse quickened. Reaching over, he gently pried the metal tag from Buddy's mouth. The collar was old, dusty and worn, but something about it felt wrong. He turned it over in his hands, and then he saw it. Etched into the cold metal, almost invisible beneath the grime, was a series of letters and numbers. His breath hitched. X027, property of H Industries. The truth hits hard. Sam stared at the tag, the weight of realization settling in his chest. Emily wasn't the first child they had taken. This had happened before, many times. His fingers curled around the collar, rage simmering beneath his skin. H Industries wasn't just some shut-down experiment. They were still active, still taking children, and if Emily had been a part of it, then how many others were still out there? A slow chill ran down Sam's spine. They had stolen the black bag to cover their tracks. They had chased him, shot at him, threatened him, all to keep him from finding out the truth. But they had missed one clue. This collar, the proof that Emily wasn't alone. His grip on the wheel tightened. He had made it this far. He had saved the girl. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. The warning. A soft beep pulled Sam's attention to the dashboard screen. His truck's radio display had flickered to life. A single message appeared on the screen. Turn around, or you won't make it to morning. His blood ran cold. Someone was watching him. Right now. His fingers hovered over the controls. The radio wasn't even turned on. This wasn't just a message. This was a warning. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Sam had spent his life outrunning trouble, keeping his head down, avoiding fights that weren't his. But not this time. Not anymore. His gaze shifted back to the sleeping child and the loyal dog beside her. They were counting on him. And whoever sent that message, they were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. Sam slammed the accelerator, his truck roaring forward into the unknown. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Sam Carter has just uncovered a chilling secret. Emily is not the only victim. The collar might be the key to exposing everything, but H Industries has found him, and now they've sent a warning. What will Sam do next? Should he run, or face the truth head-on? Who is really behind all of this? Leave a comment with your thoughts. Hit follow so you don't miss the next part of this story. Because some secrets were never meant to stay buried. Are you ready to uncover the truth?